Actually, the stomach of the horse is a bit particular because you have this upper part, that is the squamous part, and then you have the lower part, that is the glandular part, and that is then separated by the margo plicatus. So you can have ulcers in both parts. You don't treat it also the same way. And also for the nutritional management, sometimes we will adapt a little bit depending if it's the glandular part or the squamous part. So I think it's very important to first know where it's located because that will help for the treatment and the nutritional management.
Hello, and welcome to another special equine-focused episode of the Pet Food Science Podcast, where we explore the science behind how we feed our horses. I'm your host, Dr. Alex Rankovich, and today I'm very excited to be welcoming back Dr. Marie-Céline Hottat, veterinarian diplomat of the European College of Veterinary and Comparative Nutrition, and a teaching and research associate in animal nutrition at Ghent University. She joined us previously to talk about equine obesity, and today I'm excited to have her back to dive into another really important topic that I think a lot of horse owners, veterinarians, and nutritionists commonly struggle with, and that's gastric ulcers and how nutrition can help manage and prevent them. Dr. Hottat, welcome back to the podcast. It's so great to see you again.
Yes, I'm very happy to be there.
That's great. I'm really excited to get the chance to talk to you about ulcers. And it's been a little while since we had the chance to talk on this podcast. Did you want to share with the audience what you've been up to at Ghent recently? What's been going on in your life since the last time you were on?
Yeah, so since the last time, you already said a bit in the introduction, I passed the exam of the European College of Veterinary and Comparative Nutrition. So I'm very happy about that. So yeah, and for the research, I continue at Ghent University, and it's more about also body weight, muscle condition, etc. So we continue on that. But today we will talk about gastric ulcers because it's something I really see in horses here in the clinic. It's it's still a very big problem, I think, and that we can really target with nutrition. So
I agree.
Feed formulation software is stuck in the past. Most tools haven't evolved beyond basic least cost optimization. A Diet Forge changes that. It's an AI-powered platform with nonlinear ingredient modeling for enzymes and additives, cost per gain and maximum profit optimization, and real-time collaboration like Google Docs for nutrition. Every recommendation is grounded in world-class research, built for modern nutritionists who need more than legacy desktop software can deliver. Work seamlessly with your team and optimize the way modern operations demand. Try dietforge.ai free today. Feed formulation, finally modernized.
Before we go in, though, I just want to go back to you becoming a diplomat, because I don't think that a lot of people maybe know all the work and time that goes into being a diplomat. And there's so few people, I think, focused on horses in particular. So maybe you could kind of tell the audience what that means and all the time that it took you to kind of get to that and all the education.
Yes, indeed. So it's already several years I'm in Ghent University. Now I have a fixed position, but yeah, you need to go through the residency so that it's 3 years of intense work of learning and doing a lot of cases, etc. So it's horses, but I also did a bit of cats and dogs because we have also a lot of cases here. And then you need to do you need to meet some criteria of publication, etc. And then you can take the exam, which is 3 big parts, is quite heavy, I might say. But I'm very happy that I could pass, and also from the first time. So yes.
Good. That's awesome. That's a huge achievement. And so great to have experts like you too that now veterinarians and nutritionists can turn to as well. And so because you are right at that intersection of veterinary medicine and nutrition, we're going to break down ulcers, like you said, a little bit more and talk about gastric health. And so it's great to have you on today to discuss this topic. Before we start, maybe we could start by having you explain what exactly gastric ulcers are.
Yeah, well, so actually the stomach of the horse is a bit particular because you have this upper part, that is the squamous part, and then you have the lower part, that is the glandular part, and that is then separated by the margo plicatus. So you can have ulcers in both parts. You don't treat it also the same way. And also for the nutritional management, sometimes we will adapt a little bit depending if it's the glandular part or the squamous part. So I think it's very important to first know where it's located, because that will help for the treatment and the nutritional management.
And so with there being glandular and squamous too, do they develop differently, or how do they develop, and what are the signs and symptoms that you see in horses with them?
Yeah, well, actually, the glandular part, as it says, you have a mucus layer. So when you have ulcers there, it's a bit more wear, but it's due to a lack of blood flow. Sometimes there is often linked also to stress. And in the squamous part, because it's not protected by this mucus layer that also contains bicarbonate, when you have too much acidity in the stomach, that's the moment where you will have more of this squamous gastric ulcers.
Right, and the squamous then are obviously much more common, and typically,
yes, indeed.
It's those ones as well. And so, what are the signs or symptoms that you often see in horses that are affected with either the squamous or glandular ulcers?
Yeah, well, it's depends a bit from horse to horse. You have some horses that are a bit some kind of drama queens, so they will
have one of those.
yeah, indeed. So you have the ones that will really colic. You see that they will not eat their concentrate. So when you don't find anything on clinical examination, you might think, okay, we might check for gastric ulcers. Other ones is quite vague symptoms, can be weight loss on the longer term, a bit of muscle loss, but it can also be lack of performance, the coat that is not that shiny anymore. So it's or just difficult to ride also for the rider. So it's more a bit vague symptoms, and to really diagnose it, it's the best is to do a gastroscopy. That's really the gold standard. It's just to go with the camera then to the stomach and just see which kind of ulcers do we have there and their gravity. So because you can then have a classification, it goes from 0 to 4. 4 is very severe gastric ulcers, 0 is none. So that's how we do.
Yeah, and I find often it's the behavioral changes or kind of those, are those reliable clues? Like if a horse I know girthiness is one that people often attribute to ulcers, but even like irritability or reluctance to work, do you find that those are reliable?
It's difficult to say, obviously, but you see sometimes when you put the saddle on and you see that the horse is not, sometimes they react when you put the saddle on, and sometimes it's because they know they are going to work, and when you work with the empty stomach, if the horse works with an empty stomach, then you can have this splashing effect, so the acidity that goes on this squamous part, and that's also he already knows that he's going to be painful, so sometimes they react before that. And also you can also have some irritability when you are riding the horse, so that can also happen. Now, it's also possible you have just a grumpy horse, but certainly in owners that notice a difference, I think it's a good idea to check it.
Yeah, and you had already even mentioned, checking in and how it's diagnosed. I think in a lot of cases too, there's situations where people see these changes and they just treat without a diagnosis. What's your opinion on that? Is that a good approach, or do you really need that diagnosis in order to sort of sway how you're treating?
Well, actually, the treatment is quite expensive, at least here in Europe it is. So the thing is that maybe you're also treating for nothing. And second thing is that you will adapt also a bit the treatment depending on where the gastric ulcers are. So maybe you will just give some omeprazole. That is a very common medication we use for gastric ulcers, but if it's in the glandular part, you should also add a second type of medication. So it's better. I would recommend to check it. Obviously, the gastroscopy, it's also not that cheap, but maybe it is
cheap though.
No, it's true. It's a big animal, so everything is expensive. But indeed, the gastroscopy, it's good to check it because maybe you don't need to treat, and so you don't need to pay for the medication.
Yeah, I agree. I recently just treated my horse with glandular ulcers, and the drugs were very expensive. And I got them for my husband, who's a vet, so they were a little cheaper for me, and they were still very expensive.
Yes, indeed.
Was a very long time too, right? It wasn't, at least with the glandular, I think we treated her for about a month. So it wasn't even just the cost, it's also the time that went into it. I think too, that maybe people underestimate as well. And so when we're looking at ulcers, in your opinion and in your experience, what are the biggest risk factors when it comes to development, whether it's nutritional, management, environmental? What do you see as being the biggest factors?
Well, it's often a combination. What we still see, it's owners not feeding sufficient roughage, because roughage, they will chew, they will make saliva, and in the saliva you will have some bicarbonate that will have a buffer effect on your stomach. So this is, I would say, almost number one. It's not feeding sufficient roughage, or sometimes also very rough roughage, like very fibrous. Mechanically, it can also irritate a little bit the stomach. And then I think the high starch diets with a lot of concentrates, big meals, that could also still be a problem. Why? Because your sugars and starch will be already fermented in your stomach, because in the squamous part you can still have some bacteria there, and so it will the bacteria will produce also lactate, make it even more acid. So that is also a very big risk factor. And I think you also mentioned some management risk factors, and we see also that horses that receive only 2 meals and they don't use slow feeders or whatever, and they stay with an empty stomach more than 6 hours, that they already feel the acidity in the stomach. And then, if you have all other kind of risk factors, nutritionally, you also have alfalfa chaff, for example, that has been showed in foals, or a lack of access to pasture, or intermittent access to water, feeding a lot of amount of straw. So you have really different kind of risk factors. And then also for the glandular part, maybe we forgot to say also some medication. And so such as the NSAIDs can also really have an effect on the glandular part.
I didn't know about the alfalfa chaff and foals, and that being a risk factor that's been identified, because at least here, and what I often see is people feeding alfalfa if they think their horses have ulcers, or to prevent ulcers because of the higher calcium. So what's your opinion on that? Is that something you recommend still, like before exercise, or how do you balance the two, I guess?
Well, I actually more recommend the pelleted form, because it contains calcium carbonate that can have this buffer effect. But actually the short fibers are quite hard, and even when you feel with your hands, some of them, maybe not all, are quite hard, and it can cause some irritation. And there is one study in foals that showed that around the pylorus, it could influence the gastric ulcers over there. So me personally, I never use this short fibers of alfalfa, but though I use the pelleted form.
Okay, interesting, because I've heard almost the opposite a lot, where people are suggesting, the pellets maybe don't do enough, and you need the actual flakes and the long stem forage to kind of create that buffer. So is it more horse dependent, do you think, or is it?
Yeah, I think also you could use some short fibers, but I would rather use like a kind of grass short fiber source, because then it's true that it will buffer the effect in the stomach, just to absorb the acidity that is there, certainly before training. Here in Belgium, we don't have that much access to long stem alfalfa, so we don't really use it. But it's also something you could use, obviously. I'm more afraid of this short fibers, and it's something you often see in the different type of feed you can have on the market that is for stomach, but you often have this kind of short fibers of alfalfa. So yeah, I'm not a fan of it.
No, it's interesting. I hadn't heard of that connection, so I'm learning something new here today too. That's
yes,
great.
indeed.
So I think that's another thing too that sometimes horse owners get confused about too, is how much, if you're recommending, let's say, alfalfa before workload or before exercise for that sort of buffering effect, how much needs to be fed in order for there to be that buffering effect?
Well, it's just to absorb actually the acidity that is in the stomach, so you do not have this splashing effect. It can be just a kilo or something of the short fibers. It's almost nothing, because when it does not weigh a lot. You also need to consider the total diet, obviously, because we calculate it really in detail, and so we take it in the feeding plan to make sure that you have something that is complete and balanced. So there is no really recommendation of how much you should feed. We can give like something like a kilo or something before exercise, just to have this acidity that is just absorbed, to not have this splashing effect.
No, it's great advice. I think that's like a very practical tip that horse owners can, easily implement. I think too, when you're grooming your horse, you bring them in, just giving them that little bit of alfalfa before you get on could make a big difference. And how much do you think, for our horses that are performing and our show horses, how much of an impact does travel or training schedule or the show environment itself have when it comes to risk factors and ulcers?
Well, I think it's also often stress for horses. Now, it's true that stress is a bit of a vague term. I usually divide it in physiological stress and psychological stress. So physiological is more pain, illness, and so on. And psychological, it is this travel, this isolation, these competitions that can be very stressful for horses. And we see that chronic and repeated stress can also reduce that gastric blood flow, decrease the prostaglandin production that could also affect them. Could increase the risk on this glandular gastric ulcers. And so you have also less of this mucus in the glandular part. So I think that all of these events and stress are also linked to this glandular gastric ulcers.
And so in that case, with something like it's very common here, and I assume it is in Europe too, that people will sort of give omeprazole ahead of these events to try and get ahead of these risk factors and the development of ulcers. Is that something that you recommend and something you've seen success with?
We can use it as a prevention. Omeprazole is true. But the thing is that omeprazole also has an impact on calcium digestibility. I think also magnesium digestibility. So you need to be careful to use it really on long term. So that's something we would not really recommend. You would use omeprazole if it's needed, I would say. I'm not too much in favor of using in prevention because I'm afraid that owners will use it more on longer term, actually. And I'm a bit afraid of the interactions you can have with other nutrients.
Yeah, I'd also seen, it was specific to dogs, but there was some research showing that omeprazole changed the gut microbiome and resulted in dysbiosis in healthy animals. And so I sometimes wonder whether long-term omeprazole and maybe a horse that doesn't have ulcers, if you're getting dysbiosis, sort of what is the long-term consequence of that? Are you almost causing problems if there wasn't a problem there? But I'm not sure that we know.
I don't think it has been investigated yet, or maybe I just don't know about it. But
I don't think it has in horses. Yeah,
I do. Yeah, I do agree with you on that.
We have the show environment, which of course has a lot of stressors, but then even at home, horses maybe are experiencing, I want to say low grade stress, but maybe stress that owners are underestimating, maybe like, herd dynamics or isolation or the stable environment. Is that something that you find?
Yes. And you should then try to have really a routine for the horse. Often owners are noticing it when you have stereotypies, waving behavior, crib biting. So then it's also more difficult to do something about it because it's slightly late. But indeed, it's something that you need to take into account, that a horse, you need to find him some friends that he can go out and pasture. You need to check also the hierarchy in between the horses. If you see that he's isolated from the other one, then maybe pasture turnout is not the best solution for that horse. But in general, it's trying to maximize this pasture turnout, social contact, trying to have this kind of routine, try to not have too much stressful events. And also for exercising, I think there is also guidelines about only exercising five days a week. For horses that are more prone to this gastric ulcers linked to stress and so on.
Yeah, and I think there's something to just with the way, like, let's say if you, this was something that Ben Sykes, when he was on the podcast, had mentioned, is that horses will naturally eat more and less at certain times of day, even if they're provided ad lib forage. So is exercising later in the day something that would also be recommended for horses that are maybe more prone to ulcers?
Yeah, you just need to check that you are not exercising on an empty stomach. So if you feed the horse in the morning and he's just in the stable, he's does not have any pasture turnout, it is something you need to check. If then you're right, I don't know, early evening before his evening meal, yeah, that's maybe not something we would recommend. But then if you have pasture turnout, he can eat, and you are sure that actually he has something like forage or fiber actually in his stomach, then it's something I think you can just write later evening. That's also fine.
Yeah, I think all of your answers are really pointing to how important management and diet are together. And it's not just one or the other, but really looking at the whole picture of the horse's lifestyle and what's happening day to day. As a veterinary nutritionist, from your perspective, let's say you have a client brings in their horse, you've diagnosed it with ulcers. What are the first things you do? What do you find to be the most effective when it comes to managing ulcers?
Yes, so first I have a look to this kind of risk factors. So I have an analysis of the current diet of the horse. I try to see if we are at risk of having these gastric ulcers, and what do I need to target to adapt then the nutritional management. I think first is to check the roughage, good quality, maybe not too fibrous in this case, is insufficient. So you need to meet this minimum recommendation of 1.5% of dry matter per kilo horse per day. So that's really a must. And also feeding sufficient fiber. So normally I check also then in the diet your crude fiber content to be above 25% on dry matter basis. And then for everything that is concentrates, I try to choose something that is lower in sugars and starch. I choose like alfalfa pellet, or I can choose this shorter fibers, but then maybe something like grass, kind of chopped grass that I can add to the diet. And then also, the sugars and starch, you should do it per meal, but also per day. Normally, you have some recommendation like to be below 2 grams of sugars and starch per kilo horse per day. You have also the maximum of 1. And then also, you need to take into account some minerals too, because they have actually seen that some sulfate forms could also be linked to gastric ulcers than the chelated minerals. So it's something you need to check if you give some concentrates, so low sugars and starch, and maybe check a bit the minerals. And then something that we often forget, it's water. So do the horse always has access to clean water? So that is also something we need to check. And then what we try to do then, if it's a sport horse that still need energy, is to, instead of giving sugars and starch, it's to replace it by more oil, because oil can also decrease your gastric HCl in the stomach, and it will also increase your gastric fluid, etc. So it's really going to help on that. And then fibers, as I said, it's very, very important. For oil, don't forget vitamin E. Obviously, I can just drop it here. Or can also under the form of rice bran or something like that.
With the sugars and starches, I think a lot of people know to look at the concentrates, but how much are you worried about sugar and starch in the hay or if a horse is out on pasture? Is that also a concern?
Yes, definitely. So you need also to check a type of hay that is not too high in sugars, so in fructans, and at the same time that is also not too much fibrous, because just for the mechanical irritation. So I want something actually in the middle, quite low in sugars if it's possible. And for pasture turnout, usually grass is higher in fructans once it's under stress. So really overgrazed pastures, or usually also in the late afternoon when you have a sunny day and it's very cold during the night, or like we have it now here in Belgium. I cannot imagine in Canada. So yeah, well, so we have cold nights. The sun is not always shining here, but when it does, fructans are much higher because it works with photosynthesis. So yeah, it's always a matter of actually balance. I have a bit this feeling. So yes, indeed. So we need absolutely to take the amount of sugars also in the hay. And when I consider it a meal, actually it's hay plus concentrates.
Yeah, I find that something, to your point, balance, right? I think there is this idea of, okay, we'll just let the horse graze then, because that's better than having them inside with concentrates, which yes, but then I think people do forget about the impact potentially of pasture as well. And on that same note, horses that are overweight or obese, because this was a topic that you talked to us about last time, how do you manage a horse that either has ulcers or is at risk of ulcers, and maybe one that also needs to lose weight, or one that easily gains weight, with trying to manage those ulcers?
Yes, it's not an easy case. So for maybe the nutritionists that are listening, what I always try to do is that I have my problem list of the different problems that the horse has. So, for example, overweight or obesity, and then my gastric ulcers. And then I go nutrient by nutrient, and then I make a kind of table. And I think, okay, how do I want my energy for just obesity, and then my protein, my fat, my fiber, etc. And then I do the same for gastric ulcers, and I try to combine as good as possible. I think it's going to be a challenge, because usually I do not like to use straw in my feeding plan for my gastric ulcers. But at the same time, it will be maybe necessary to have something lower in energy for my hay. Also, I like to add a little bit of straw in my diet with obesity, so then I can't. So, and then for the rest, I would keep it very simple. It is roughage balancer, so to have my vitamins and minerals. Maybe a protein balancer that will be necessary, and try to also in the management to use all of these tricks we have, like slow feeders, double hay nets, grazing muzzle if to go on pasture. I'm not super fan, because to lose weight and being on pasture, some horses, they are very smart to get this muzzle off. So the management, I think, would be very, very important in this case, because you need to also separate in several meals. So yeah, indeed. And you can also add alfalfa pellet and maybe make it wet, make it soak, so the volume will be higher. That's also something we can do.
Yeah, great
But
tips.
indeed, it's not easy.
Yeah, and I think your answers really point to how you have to consider every horse individually too, because it's the horse, but also the barn that they're at and the whole management that comes behind that.
And we always check what the owner is able to do. So you have always owners that they expect a bit of a miracle. I think the horse needs to lose weight, but needs to stay in the pasture with all other horses fed hay ad libitum. Yeah, it's not. You need also to do a bit of an effort. However. Yeah, we need to try to do also what the owner is able to do. If the owner tells me, look, I work all day, I can feed is at home, I can feed in the morning when I come back from work at like 5-6 p.m. and then maybe before going to bed around, I don't know, 9 p.m., something like that, then it's already very good, I would say. And then we use this kind of tricks. You have also this automatic feeders now also coming on the market for hay.
I love those. I think those are so cool. Yeah, I love them.
Indeed. You also have it for concentrates. Also, if you, well, we will not give a lot of concentrates to a horse that needs to lose weight, but you have this kind of tricks to make the horse eat much more slowly.
And I think to your point too, meeting those owners where they're at, and not just, 0 or 100, like you either do everything or you don't. It's even, like you said, progress or just a little bit of change can make a big difference. And I think that's really important. And hopefully some of these new technological advances like the automatic feeders can help us out a little bit too.
Yes, let's hope. And I think it's still quite pricey, at least in Europe it is. So let's hope that it will maybe decrease by time a little bit for like any kind of owner to be able to buy one or several. If they have several horses, that would be wonderful.
I think they're more expensive here because I think they all come out of Europe. I think that's where
okay.
So they're pretty uncommon over here, but I'm hoping maybe one day soon.
Yes, fingers crossed.
Yeah. And I think something else that often a lot of horse people maybe have questions about or they're seeing is these supplements that are geared towards gastric health or supplements that are maybe suggesting that they can prevent ulcers or treat ulcers. What is your experience with those?
Actually, there is some research about supplements. It's something we can use. I use it more as plan B. Plan A is to have first my complete and balanced diet. B is then, okay, if the owner really asks, we can add some nutraceuticals. There is some research around several ones, magnesium hydroxide, calcium carbonate, you have collagen, sea buckthorn berry, beta-glucans. You have several ones that has been studied to have a positive effect on gastric ulcers, depending. Some are on more the glandular part, others more for the squamous part, but it's mainly glandular part actually. And then you need also to manage the stress. You can do it by management, but you have also some supplements like ashwagandha, for example. It has been studied that could have a beneficial effect. You also have alpha-casozepine that could also eventually help. And then if the horse is very painful, you can also target that, obviously, if it's painful due to his gastric ulcers. You have some supplements containing devil's claw, so this harpagophytum procumbens. Sometimes I use also this because there is also a study from 22 that showed that it had no effect on the stomach. So for pain release, you can use it. So also turmeric has been studied that it would not cause any damage on the stomach, because usually you see that often on this kind of products. Be careful. But actually there is a study in 22 that has been done, quite interesting, where they had a look to when they supplemented it, and then they had a look before and after. They did some gastroscopies, and they have, it was not significant difference.
Okay. And I always wonder with some of these nutraceuticals too, like you had mentioned turmeric as an example, how much does it take volume-wise, though? Because I always, think about the horse being obviously a very big animal, and people sometimes will feed a sprinkle or they'll feed like half a teaspoon, and I can't imagine that's doing too much. But what's your experience with that?
Yeah, indeed. So you need to. We always try to follow what we have in the different studies, and to have this kind of dosages to try to make a difference. Now, if it's something like a teaspoon of turmeric, I'm not convinced that is going to help. First, it's too little. Second, the bioavailability is not great, certainly if it's under a powder form. So indeed, I do agree with you that, you need to really check the nutraceutical. And as a horse owner, I would ask recommendation to their own vet or to a really equine nutritionist that has also some degree, because some nutritionists, they don't have a lot of training, etc. So they need to ask help about that.
No, that's a great point. I think it's so easy to spend money, I think, as a horse owner, that watching where you're spending it and making sure that you're being as effective as you can. And to your point about training too, I think, unfortunately, with social media, at least, I think there's a lot of people who are giving advice and calling themselves nutritionists when maybe they're not. So
yes, indeed. I consider that for a nutritionist, you should at least have a PhD, I think. I think that would be good. But I'm sure that there is some nutritionists that they know what they are talking about. But I'm also a bit afraid of people I see on social media. I maybe have more than others, as I'm a nutritionist myself. And sometimes I think I see the content and I'm just like, no, it's not that correct. And it's misinformation, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of that. And it's sad because I think everyone wants to do right by their horse at the end of the day. So another question I wanted to ask you about was with the glandular ulcers in particular. If stress seems to be one of the biggest factors, how do you change the diet then of a horse that has glandular ulcers, or how do you approach that? I know you had mentioned a couple of supplements, but apart from that, is it more management and kind of stress management in those cases?
Yeah, I think it's still a combination. So it will be stress management, but we also still will do all the changes nutritionally wise. If I see that the horse is not getting any food, for example, for many hours, we need to target. Obviously, not just for the gastric ulcers, but just for well-being too. So this is something that we need to take into account. But so what I will do is still have a look to the diet to optimize it, and then give some advice. And I have the chance to be at university, so we have also some specialists of the European College in Behavior to help us in that. So yes, that's something we need to target.
Oh, it's great that you're able to have a team approach to some of these cases that are a little bit more complicated. And I feel like with the glandular ulcers in particular, we still don't know as much as we'd like to know.
Indeed.
It's time for our famous three.
Tired of navigating the pet food industry alone? The Pet Food Inner Circle brings together the brightest minds in pet nutrition, where seasoned professionals share real insights and tackle the challenges that matter most. When you need answers, industry leaders are just a conversation away. Ready to join the circle? Visit petfoodinnercircle.com and connect with your peers today.
Well, that's great. And before we let you leave, is there one thing that you wish more people understood when it came to ulcers and nutrition? Whether that's horse owners or veterinarians or any nutritionists listening, if you could leave them with one last piece of advice or something to consider, what would it be?
I would say that it's a combination of different type of treatments. It's nutritionally wise, it's management wise, it's the stress, it's sometimes medication. So you need to have a multi approach, I would say. And then prevention is obviously the key before you have the gastric ulcers. Unfortunately, a lot of horses do have, wild horses also do have some ulcers. So I think it's not an easy thing. And yeah, it's just a combination of nutrition management, stress management, and so on.
It's complicated.
Complicated indeed, but we try our best. So.
Yeah, of course. And having experts and a team approach, like you mentioned, I think makes all the difference too. So hopefully letting people know if you're a horse owner struggling with ulcers, that there are people that you can turn to, and hopefully that'll help you. So
we always do our best.
Yeah, no, perfect. Well, thank you, Dr. Hottat, so much for being here today. I find your explanations are always so clear and so practical. And I think this conversation will help veterinarians, nutritionists, and horse owners understand ulcers in a much more informed way, I hope. To everyone listening, thank you so much for joining for another special equine edition of the Pet Food Science Podcast. If you found this episode helpful, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And Dr. Hottat, thank you so much for being here again. It's always a pleasure, and hopefully we can have you back again in the future to maybe discuss something else. I think.
Yes, would love to.
We'll see. We'll find something to discuss.
Yes, definitely. And thank you so much for the invitation.
Of course. Thank you again.